Welcome. Today we're going to review our Smart Manufacturing Detailed Blueprint process. As you may have seen from a previous webinar, VDI is one of the leading practitioners of the CESMII Smart Manufacturing Roadmap process. We are big believers in that process as a lightweight, low-cost way to build an industry standard roadmap for your smart manufacturing journey. But we have found that some of our customers want a more detailed process. So we have built a more extensive process with a much more detailed discovery that allows us to create a significantly expanded end product. I'll be giving the details of that later on. However, we still adhere to the key tenets of the CESMII process. This is a vendor independent analysis. It's not biased in any direction and will absolutely not include a sales pitch for any product or service. Also, while we look at smart manufacturing software and hardware technologies, any recommendation will come within the context of any process, cultural, or upskilling changes that will be necessary to take full advantage of those new capabilities. With all that said, let's take a more detailed look at the overall process. I'll walk through the details of the key sections throughout the rest of the presentation, but here is the overall flow. At a high level, there's nothing revolutionary here. The magic is in the details of the analysis and the structure of the value proposition and blueprint. After the kickoff, we start with a discovery process that includes document requests, surveys, plant visits, and a number of interviews. We continue with a number of working sessions to delve into the root causes for the current levels of performance and ideate about the potential for the future. From there, we continue with sessions to build the blueprint itself, and then we conclude with a set of reviews and revisions, and then the final presentations and a transition to execution. So the discovery process breaks down into a set of surveys where we do utilize the CESMII Smart Manufacturing Assessment as part of this overall process. If you've already done a CESMII assessment, then we can just work with the results from that roadmap. We also do a corporate strategy survey that contains a number of questions along a number of different dimensions. I'll show that in a minute. And then we move into a set of document requests. These requests cover your current reports, if you have done strategy deployment or Hush and Connery, or anything along those lines. We'll look at that so that we make sure that we align what we're doing from a smart manufacturing strategy with the overall strategy of the organization. If you have architecture maps for IT and OT, those would be very good so that we know where we're starting from. Process maps that you've done, whether it's value stream maps, process maps, any other type of cash-to-cash cycle time map or anything else that you've created. If you've done recent Kaizen events, looking at those events and the outputs from those. If you've done FMEAs and so forth, we'd like those documents as well, so we can understand what are some of the root causes for the current performance. And then looking at plant layouts and things like that as well. We'll want to do plant visits, and when we do plant visits, we do them very intentionally. We're looking for a number of things when we do the plant visits. We want to identify any uses of paper within the organization so that we can identify where you're still doing paper-based tracking and so forth, so that we can look, can we automate that with smart manufacturing? We'll look for the 7 wastes, transportation, inventory, etc., and see what we can do from a smart manufacturing to address those. We'll look at the physical layout, the equipment itself. We'll look for what are the visual controls and communication that you have out on the shop floor. We'll look at the material flow through the facility, how you do maintenance and how you manage your spares. What are the current levels of performance? What is the current reporting that's done within the plant? Looking at outsourcing and OT with the controllers and connections and so forth. So very intentional, very detailed look at the current processes within the facilities. Then we also have a set of deep dive interviews that we'll want to do. with a variety of different teams within the business. We really want to understand the manufacturing environment first and foremost, but we also need to understand the business environment that you're operating under. Are there opportunities to expand sales if we could reduce lead times or improve quality, et cetera? Um, Looking at the supply chain and what are the constraints within the supply chain. The IT OT, as I mentioned, looking at the financials of the business, and then understanding the organization resources as well. What are the current skill levels of the people? What are the different levels of continuous improvement that you have established within the organization and so forth? And then future state surveys are going to take place a little bit later, but they are part of the discovery process. So what we ask people to do is put themselves into the mindset of 3 years from now, where do you want the organization to be? So the reason that we do this a little bit later in the process is we want to go through some of the next steps here to help people start to understand what are the possibilities that could be put in place and so forth, and then do the survey at that time so that they have some of those ideas in their head of where the business could be 3 years from now when they take that future state survey. So a little bit more about the corporate strategy survey. We go across 11 different dimensions of strategy: cost advantage, reliability for delivery, quality advantage, speed to market, flexibility, differentiation, product differentiation, strong customer relationships, efficient supply chain, intellectual property development, workforce development, and sustainability. And when we're done with that, we can see kind of the current shape of the strategy for the business. And the goal as we move towards the future state is to understand where are the areas that we want to expand those capabilities of the business. And that helps to drive the strategy of what we need to put in place from that smart manufacturing perspective. So as we go into the working sessions, we start by looking at the current state documentation. We're going to take all the survey results, the interview results, the plant visit results, and we're going to combine that all into that comprehensive current state document. And one of the things that we'll be focusing on as we look at that documentation is where do the value leaks exist within the operation? Where do you have bottlenecks in the process? Where do you have excessive downtime? Where do you have quality issues and so forth? And then for each of those value leaks, we want to understand what are the things that are driving that lack of performance within the operation. And this can be fairly detailed, it can be fairly high level. Depends on the scope of what we're looking at. But what we want to understand is at least what are the high level causes for that value leak that's driving the performance within the business. By doing that, we can start to map what are the actual things that we need to put in place, either from a process perspective, upskilling the people, a cultural perspective, or a technology perspective, to address those root causes of the current levels of performance. Because that's what's really going to drive the confidence that what we're putting in place directly addresses those things that are inhibiting the performance of the business today. The next thing we start to do is to look at what we call value gaps. So the value leaks are for the existing processes. The value gaps are things that you're not doing at all today. And so these are things that if we think through that radar chart that we were looking at earlier, perhaps there are things that you could be doing that you're not doing today that you could take advantage of going forward. And so those are the types of things that we want to really generate ideas on and then evaluate and prioritize those ideas for what are the new possibilities that could be put in place to capture that value. So once we've done this analysis, now is the time when we want to look at that future state and take those surveys. And once the surveys are in place, we can start to look at putting that future state documentation together that incorporates information from the deep dive interviews, that incorporates information from the analysis that we just did as part of these working sessions, as well as the survey results to say, where do we want to be at the end of those 3 years? So as we're going through that analysis, we start off with what are the goals of the business? Primarily financial, of course, but if you think from a triple bottom line perspective, we would also incorporate the social and the environmental aspects. And first, we start off with the process improvement path. So the existing processes today. And so with that existing business model, we break that down into the current processes and what are the KPIs and measures that you have in place for those current processes today. What are the value leaks or inefficiencies that exist within those processes? And what are the causes for that? And then on the process innovation path, we look at the potential business models, the potential processes that you could have within the organization. And what are those value gaps? What are the missing capabilities that you could have? And then why don't you have those today? What is the reason that that gap exists? And once we've done that analysis, then we can start to look at how do we tie all of this together. And we do that with this top-down analysis. We're starting with the goals of the business. Those could be improving quality, reducing cost, improving throughput, et cetera. We look at the KPIs that are associated with those. So I'm going to stick with quality examples here. So improving quality, the KPI could be first pass yield, customer complaints, lots of other ones. Then each of those KPI is typically a compound measure. So there are actual measurable things that are happening on the shop floor, like how many pieces are actually rejected and what are the total number of pieces produced that actually go into the calculation for the KPI. And breaking it down into the measures is important because that actually helps us tie it into the next step of when we have those rejected pieces, what is the actual reason that each piece is getting rejected? Is it machining variability? Is it a lack of standard process? Is it variation in worker actions, et cetera? So this is the value leak level. And then there will be causes for each one of those different value leaks. So it could be tooling wear, machining condition, for lack of standard process. It could be a lack of documented work instructions, or maybe they're just not visible. For variation in worker actions, it could be an inadequate training. It could be a lack of visible feedback. And once we get down to this level, now there are things that we can start to do to directly address those. So for instance, if we're having tool wear or the machine is not in proper functioning condition and that's causing excess variability, which is causing rejected pieces, we definitely need to focus on our maintenance strategy and so forth. And what can we do around that? If it's a lack of work process or lack of standard process and lack of documented work instructions, or they're not visible, we can start to think about digital work instructions. And so this ties us and directs us directly to the things that we need to put in place in order to improve the operations of the business. So from there, we move into those working sessions where we start to take those causal factors that are driving the lack of performance in the business. And we now map the things that we need to do from a technology perspective, a process perspective, or an upskilling and cultural change. And we start to look at listing those out and tying those into the causes that we just saw. And that's going to help us drive the valuation, because if we've been rigorous as we've gone along in documenting or at least estimating how much of an impact for rejected pieces, each one of those value leaks has, and then each one of those causes has. If we say that we put digital work instructions in place, that's going to address the vast majority of those issues of people not following standard work. Well, now we have an estimate of how much that's going to reduce our rejected pieces. We know how much those cost, and that helps us create the value map. And so as we have done that, now we have a list of initiatives. We know how much those are going to be worth, or at least we have a very good estimate of how much those are going to be worth to the business. But if you're looking at an initiative like putting an IoT system in place to do machine monitoring, there are a myriad of different things that you can do with that within the organization. So the next step is to break that down into sprints. And what we want to do with these sprints is to say that the first thing we're going to do is basic machine monitoring and being able to respond faster when the machine goes down so that we can get it back up in a more timely fashion. Um, Next, we're going to tie that into our condition-based maintenance process so that we can start to look at when that machine is going out of tolerance and so forth. The next step is we're going to build in predictive maintenance and so forth. And now we're going to start utilizing that information as we do our next series of product development. And we're going to take the information about how the manufacturing is actually done on that, where the inefficiencies are, and bake that into our next generation of product design. So as we go through, we can look at these sprints as how we take full advantage of those new capabilities that we have within the business. And I'll take a look at how we do the sprint definitions in a minute. And then once we have all of that defined, we have the value proposition, we have the sprint definitions, the complete list of initiatives. Now we're going to combine that with the future state documentation and create that initial blueprint for the business. So we've done the bottom up analysis previously. What we do here is we look at that process, people, and technology changes that we need to put in place, how those address the value leaks and the value causes, as well as the value gaps and the gap causes. And then we look at how we're going to have that new or updated process, what that looks like, and then feed that back into the business models and the goals of the business to drive what does the overall impact on the business look like. And this is an overview of that entire value mapping process, where we start with what are the goals of the business, drive that down, and then we drive back up from what are the process changes that we're going to put in place, what are the things that enable that, and how does that directly address the causes, and then feed that back up into what are the functional and financial benefits. In terms of the value sprints, value sprint 0 for each initiative is typically going to be commissioning a piece of software, a piece of hardware, or multiple pieces. But then each value sprint is going to focus on specific value goals. As I mentioned with the IoT example, you're going to try to stack that capability over time. You're going to start with one piece of that to drive a particular benefit for the business. You're going to get that done. You're going to see that benefit, and then you're going to move on to the next sprint. So very focused on creating some particular type of value for the business. You're going to repeat that process. You'll do quarterly checks to make sure that everything is going to target. If adjustments or adaptations need to be made, you'll feed that back into how the process is being run and continue on. So I already gave most of the overview of how the sprints get created. We start with the overall roadmap. We create that list of initiatives. We value those initiatives, and we decompose that into sprints. And then we define the sprint attributes, where those are the different pieces of change that have to happen, the process, training, and technology. And then we look at, for each sprint, what is the time to implement that? How ready are the organizations that would be involved? Are there dependencies from that sprint to other sprints? And then how much value are we looking to create within that sprint itself? And so with that, we start to look at how we can prioritize the different sprints based on those different attributes. The sprint themselves and the structure. So again, we're feeding in from that overall value plan. We look at the outcome plan for that individual sprint as to what particular type of value is being created there. And then for every single sprint, we're looking at not just what technology are we putting in place, but what are the process changes that we're making? Are we looking at simplifying or automating or eliminating or augmenting current tasks? And how are we going to do that? What are the KPI for this sprint? we'll establish a baseline and we'll capture the before and after performance. What are the impacts of this on problem solving, on standard work, on meeting structures? How do we look at the decision making process of the business and utilize the information from the sprint to enhance that? From a cultural perspective, who's being impacted by this? What are the skills gaps that need to be addressed? How does this create wins for the people that are involved? How do we align metrics with the design behavior or with the desired behaviors that we're trying to put in place for this? How do we build those positive habits through motivation, facilitating the ability of people to do the things that we want them to, and prompting those good behaviors? And how do we put in place a solid communication plan to make sure that everybody understands what needs to be done and why it will help them and the business? So as we go through and we map the value within this process, there's two primary types of potential value in manufacturing. The first, of course, is financial. That's what the executives are going to care about. That's what leadership wants. But then there's also the functional side. And that's what you measure on a day-to-day basis: safety, quality, delivery, cost, inventory, manpower, environmental. Those are the functional measures that we within manufacturing look at on a day-to-day basis. So we need to understand the impact on those as well as the potential financial benefits. Within this process, we can also take into consideration other types of potential value. I mentioned the triple bottom line earlier, so the impact's not just on the financial side, but on the social and environmental side. Time is another critical factor for business. So how does this impact time to market? How does it impact the cycle time within manufacturing or the lead time? If we look at the cash to cash cycle time for the business, when I invest money in materials versus when I get money from customers, how long does that take, and how can we shrink that time so that we can invest that money in cycles faster and faster to improve the performance of the overall business and improve the agility of the operation? Qualitative benefits. How does this impact the quality of life for everybody? That's going to help with employee retention and recruiting. How can we address the health of the overall manufacturing ecosystem? How does this impact the company reputation within the marketplace? How does it impact personal reputations? Because that is also important. Agility and resilience are something that we'll focus on more on the next slide. So as we look at additional types of potential value going beyond the current business model, what is the innovation potential that we could look at here? Because smart manufacturing offers you all kinds of different potential for doing things that you don't do today. So if you have excess capacity and you're creating excess capacity by eliminating some of these value leaks, is that something that you could utilize for contract manufacturing? Or could you introduce new product lines and bring those to the market? Do you have an opportunity to sell more if you could make more? If you could introduce those new product lines faster or completely new lines, do you have an opportunity within what you do in your industry to introduce smart products? Could you capture new markets, whether those are new geographies or new channels? Do you have an opportunity to look at new operating models with capability as a service, or configure or build the order if you're building the stock today? There are new service models with uptime as a service if you're a machine provider, or replenishment as a service. If you're looking at agility, agility has a lot of kind of fuzzy definitions out there, but when you have fluctuations in demand, how can you capture that perishable demand that exists? How can you move into new markets that open up within the marketplace? How can you rapidly respond to change, whether that's on the supply side, the demand side, or within the labor market? And then how resilient are you as a business? How well can you handle changes in the general economic conditions, or perhaps if somebody is looking at putting trade wars in place and tariffs and so forth, how can you respond to that, and how is that going to impact your business? If you're looking at overall technology changes as time goes forward, how can you build up your resilience to those as an operation? and then supply chain disruptions and so forth. Some of the wargaming that can be done as part of this process takes those different scenarios into account. So to complete the process, once we've built the blueprint, we'll review that initially with the core team, and we'll do a set of revisions based on the feedback from the core team. And one of the key things here is that we want this to be your blueprint. We don't want to be the ones that are just doing this for you. We want you to be actually participating in this process. We want the core team to be building this side by side with us as we facilitate this process. But this, in the end, has to be something that you embrace. And so it has to be something that you're fully behind. And the best way to do that is to be participating in the creation of that plan. So we'll go through that initial revision process. We'll review it with leadership. We'll make the final revisions to that process, and then we'll create the program communication documents and the final documentation for the project. We'll do that final report based on that. And then the last step is to transition to execution. So that is the complete process. If you would like more information or you like a customized blueprint for your company, please reach out to me. There's lots of different ways to reach me that are here on the screen. Take any one of them and feel free at any time to reach out to us. Thank you very much.